What the study says.
You know that feeling at 7 a.m.? You're standing in the kitchen, the kettle is screaming, or the coffee machine is whirring, and you honestly feel like your brain is still buckering. It's the spinning wheel of death until that first sip hits.
It's the universal boot-up sequence. I don't think I'm legally competent to sign documents or review patient charts before my first cup.
Right. And for years, we've had this nagging voice, or maybe it's the media, maybe it's a well-meaning relative, telling us this ritual is a guilty pleasure.
But it's a vice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That we're over-caffeinating, we're burning out our adrenals,
Yeah.
and we need to detox to be truly healthy.
But the data has been quietly shifting on that narrative for a while now. And today, I think the shift is seismic.
Seismic is the right word. We're talking about a complete reversal of that whole vice narrative. What if that dark, bitter brew isn't just waking you up? What if it's actually building a high-powered shield around your brain? Specifically against the one thing we all fear as we age, dementia.
It's a compelling pivot. And we aren't talking about some small survey of 50 people in a coffee shop here. We are not looking at a blog post or an opinion piece.
No, we are diving into a study involving over 130,000 people, followed for nearly half a century. Welcome back to What the Study Says.
Today, we're unpacking a paper that just dropped this month, February 2026, in JAMA.
The Journal of the American Medical Association. It really doesn't get much more prestigious than that.
The study is titled Coffee and Tea Intake, Dementia Risk, and Cognitive Function, led by Yu Zhang and a heavyweight team from Harvard.
And just to set the ground rules for everyone listening, we've both gone through this paper page by page. We're looking at the raw data, the hazard ratios, the biology. The mission today is to answer one question. Is your morning habit actually neuroprotective medicine?
Precision is key here, because the question they set out to answer is one that affects millions of us as we age.
Right.
Is long-term intake of caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee associated with the risk of dementia and cognitive outcomes?
So let's look at the architecture here. Because in epidemiology, size is everything. If you have a small sample, you have noise. If you have this sample,
Pick a signal.
a very clear signal.
It's massive. They pulled data from two of the most legendary cohorts in medical history. The Nurses' Health Study, which started tracking female registered nurses back in 1980,
Right.
and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, which started tracking males in 1986.
I want to pause on why these cohorts matter, because it's a detail that often gets lost. These aren't random people off the street answering a phone survey.
No, these are nurses and health professionals.
And what does that mean for the data?
Exactly. When you ask the general public what they ate 4 years ago, they guess. I mean, they underestimate the junk and overestimate the kale. But when you ask a nurse, the data quality tends to be significantly higher.
They're trained observers.
They are. They understand portion sizes and the importance of accurate reporting.
That's a great point. And they didn't just ask them once. They sent out validated food frequency questionnaires every 2 to 4 years for decades.
This is what we call prospective data. They tracked the coffee consumption as it happened, not in hindsight after someone got sick. They ended up with over 4.3 million person-years of data.
And unfortunately, because the study ran for up to 43 years, a lot of those participants aged into the danger zone. They documented 11,033 incident cases of dementia.
Which is tragic on a human level, but scientifically, that high number of cases gives the study incredible statistical power. It allows us to really slice the data and see what's happening in the margins.
I also noticed they were really rigorous about who they let into the pool. They scrubbed anyone who had cancer, Parkinson's, or existing dementia at baseline.
Right. They wanted a clean slate. They wanted to see the development of the disease in healthy populations, not just the progression in people who were already sick.
Removes a lot of the noise.
It does. It removes the noise that ruins lesser studies.
Okay, let's get to the headline. The part everyone is waiting for. We have the nurses, we have the professionals, they're drinking their coffee. What happens to their risk profile?
Well, the headline is stark. Higher caffeinated coffee intake was significantly associated with a lower risk of dementia.
Now, define significantly for us here. Because sometimes in research, significant just means mathematically detectable, but practically useless.
In this case, it's clinically meaningful. When they compared the people with the highest intake, what they call quartile 4, to the people with the lowest intake, the incidence rate just plummeted.
Plummeted.
In raw numbers, it dropped from 330 cases per 100,000 person years down to 141.
Wow, that's less than half the rate.
And when they adjusted the statistical model controlling for smoking, exercise, diet quality, alcohol, all those potential confounders,
All the usual suspects, yep.
the hazard ratio came out to 0.82.
So in plain English, we are looking at roughly an 18% lower risk of developing dementia compared to the low coffee drinkers.
Precisely. And you have to remember, in the world of Alzheimer's and dementia, we have almost no effective pharmaceutical cures that offer that kind of protection.
Right.
An 18% reduction from a lifestyle factor, something you buy at the grocery store, is huge.
And it wasn't just a binary dementia or not diagnosis either. I was digging into the cognitive scores in the nurse's health study. They used the dissect score.
The telephone interview for cognitive status?
Yeah, the objective testing.
Right, and it mirrored the dementia findings. The high coffee drinkers had better objective cognitive performance. The difference was about 0.11 units.
Now, I can hear the skeptic listening right now thinking 0.11 units. That sounds like a rounding error. That sounds like noise.
It does sound small on paper, but you have to contextualize it against the slow, inevitable slide of aging.
Okay.
The authors calculated that this 0.11 difference is equivalent to reversing about 0.6 years of age-related cognitive decline.
So purely statistically, the high coffee drinkers' brains were operating as if they were over half a year younger than their non-coffee counterparts.
Exactly. It's buying you time. And when you compound that over decades, it suggests a more resilient brain.
That is fantastic news for the espresso crowd.
Yeah.
But my household is divided. I've got tea drinkers who claim they're being left out of the party. Did the tea drinkers get the same shield?
You can tell them to put the kettle on. The study confirmed that tea intake showed very similar inverse associations with dementia risk.
Some more numbers.
Very similar. Comparing the highest tertile of tea drinkers to the lowest, the hazard ratio was roughly 0.86, so a 14% reduction. And interestingly, on that cognitive performance test we just mentioned, the tea drinkers in the highest bracket actually scored 0.16 units higher compared to non-drinkers.
So tea might actually be slightly better for the pure cognitive scores.
In that specific metric, yes. It could be the L-theanine in tea, which, it pairs with caffeine to help focus. But the big picture is that both beverages are conferring this neuroprotective benefit.
Okay, here is where the study pulls a 180. And I think this is the Sherlock Holmes moment of the whole deep dive. We've been talking about coffee and tea. But the study made a distinction that changes how we interpret the entire biological mechanism.
The decaf dilemma.
They separated the data. Caffeinated versus decaffeinated. What happened?
The protective effect just evaporated.
Completely.
Decaffeinated coffee intake was not associated with lower dementia risk or better cognitive performance.
That is, wow. So all those people drinking decaf thinking, well, at least I'm getting the antioxidants, the chlorogenic acid, the ritual.
They are getting the antioxidants, sure. But regarding dementia risk, the data says they are missing the main event.
This is so crucial because it isolates the variable. It tells us the magic ingredient isn't the bean flavor or the oils or the warm water. It's the caffeine.
Or at least how caffeine interacts with the brain. And it gets even trickier. Did you see the data on subjective cognitive decline?
I did. This was the part where people self-reported feeling like their memory was slipping. High decaf intake was associated with a slightly higher prevalence of decline.
The ratio was 1.1 steen.
Right.
Now, we have to be incredibly careful here. Does drinking decaf cause dementia? Almost certainly not.
This is the confounding by indication issue. Right?
Exactly. Think about the typical patient profile. Why do you switch to decaf? Usually a doctor tells you to. Maybe you have high anxiety, maybe you have heart palpitations or severe insomnia.
And all those things, anxiety, poor sleep, cardiovascular issues, are themselves risk factors for dementia.
Bingo. The decaf isn't the villain, it's a marker. The people vulnerable to decline are just more likely to be the ones ordering decaf. It's what we call reverse causality.
Or the sick quitter effect.
That's the one.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But the absence of benefit in the decaf group is the smoking gun. It points us directly toward caffeine as the neuroprotective agent.
It really does. It takes a lot of the mystery out of the mechanism.
So let's double click on that mechanism. Because we aren't just reading stats, we want to know why. If caffeine is the driver, what is it actually doing?
I mean, we're not just talking about keeping your eyes open.
No. What is happening at the cellular level that stops a disease like Alzheimer's?
It's fascinating, and the paper points to a few key mechanisms. The primary one involves adenosine receptors. You know adenosine.
That's the chemical that builds up in the brain throughout the day to make us feel tired. The sleep pressure.
Correct. Caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. It sits in those receptor slots, specifically A1 and A2A, and blocks them. But it's not just about feeling alert. By blocking these receptors, caffeine appears to modulate synaptic transmission and, this is the holy grail, attenuate the accumulation of amyloid beta.
Amyloid beta, the plaque, the sticky gunk that gums up the brain in Alzheimer's patients.
Exactly. Experimental studies suggest caffeine helps the brain's cleanup crew. It suppresses the activity of enzymes like beta and gamma secretase. Those are the enzymes responsible for creating the plaque in the first place.
So it's basically acting like a neurological janitor.
In a way, yes. It helps flush out the amyloid that's already there and prevents new plaque from forming. But there's a second layer. Inflammation. We know now that neuroinflammation, a hot brain, is a massive driver of cognitive decline.
And caffeine is an anti-inflammatory.
In the brain, yes. It seems to lower pro-inflammatory cytokines. It sort of cools things down. When you have less inflammation, you have less neuronal damage.
I also saw a note about insulin. We hear Alzheimer's referred to as type 3 diabetes sometimes because of how the brain processes glucose.
Yes, and this is critical. Caffeine is linked to improved insulin sensitivity and better vascular function. We often say what's good for the heart is good for the brain.
Yeah.
If you have better blood flow and better glucose metabolism, your neurons are happier. They are getting the fuel they need without the insulin resistance that starves them.
It's amazing how systemic the effect is. It's not just one pathway. It's hitting the plaque, the inflammation, and the blood flow all at once.
And that's probably why the decaf didn't work. You can keep the antioxidants, but without that adenosine blockade and the metabolic kick from caffeine, you aren't getting the heavy lifting required to prevent dementia.
Okay, I'm sold on the mechanism. Now I need to know the dosage.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my third cup today. If caffeine is the medicine, should I be drinking 10 cups?
No.
Is this a more is better situation?
Please do not drink 10 cups. The data shows a very clear nonlinear relationship. It's not a straight line up.
So there's a plateau.
Exactly.
Okay.
The benefits don't keep compounding. The study found a sweet spot where the risk reduction was maximized.
Give us the magic numbers.
For caffeinated coffee, the optimal intake was approximately 2 to 3 cups per day. For tea, it was about 1 to 2 cups per day. If you look at it purely by caffeine content, the target is around 300 milligrams per day.
So 2 to 3 cups.
Yeah.
That's actually very moderate. That's a normal morning routine for millions of people.
It is, and the charts clearly show that once you go beyond that into extreme consumption, the risk reduction just stabilizes. You don't get extra protection for the 5th or 6th cup.
Is there a biological reason for that ceiling? Why does it stop working?
It likely comes down to liver metabolism. Our bodies rely on an enzyme called CYP1A2 to break down caffeine. That system can get saturated. There's a limit to how much it can process effectively.
And I imagine the side effects kick in at that point too.
Precisely. At extremely high doses, you start triggering the negatives. Poor sleep, high anxiety, jitters, and we know that poor sleep is a risk factor for dementia. So if you caffeinate yourself to the point of insomnia, you are effectively canceling out the neuroprotective benefit.
So the goal is the sweet spot. Enough to block the adenosine and lower the inflammation, but not so much that you wreck your sleep architecture.
Exactly. Balance is key.
I want to touch on one specific subgroup because it really stood out to me, the genetics. We know the APOE4 gene is the scary one. If you have that allele, your risk for Alzheimer's skyrockets. Did this coffee shield work for them?
This was one of the most hopeful findings in the entire paper.
Yes. The benefits were independent of genetic risk. Even for those carrying the APOE4 allele, high caffeinated coffee intake was associated with lower risk.
That is profound. It means that lifestyle, this modifiable thing you do every morning, can actually push back against your genetic destiny.
It empowers the patient. You can't change your DNA, but you can change your breakfast. It suggests that even with a loaded gun, you don't have to pull the trigger if you manage the environmental factors.
However, we have to do the doctor reality check. We can't let the hype train run off the tracks completely. What are the limitations here?
We must be responsible. This is an observational study. It is not a randomized control trial. We didn't take 10,000 people, lock them in a room, and force half of them to drink espresso for 40 years.
Right. So strictly speaking, we cannot prove causality. We can only prove a very strong association. And there's always the healthy user bias. Maybe people who drink moderate coffee are also the people who have jobs, are active, and socialize more. The researchers tried to adjust for all that mathematically, and they did a good job, but you can never perfectly eliminate it.
And we don't know how they made the coffee. French press versus filtered, black versus full of sugar.
That's a missing piece. We assume coffee means the beverage, but a sugary frappuccino is biologically very different from a black pour-over. The study data isn't granular enough to tell us if sugar cancels out the benefits, though given the link between sugar and inflammation, I'd hazard a guess that black or lightly sweetened is the way to go.
Fair point. So let's bring this all home. We've reviewed the JAMA 2026 paper. What is the verdict for the listener?
The verdict is that for the vast majority of people, moderate consumption of caffeinated coffee, that's 2 to 3 cups, or tea 1 to 2 cups, is linked to a significantly lower risk of dementia and better cognitive function over the long term.
And if you're a decaf drinker doing it for brain health, you might want to reconsider, or at least understand that the current data doesn't support a neuroprotective benefit there.
Exactly. And perhaps most importantly, this isn't a guilty pleasure. It's an accessible, modifiable brain health strategy. Unlike training for a marathon or adhering to a strict Mediterranean diet, which are great, don't get me wrong, keeping your morning coffee is the path of least resistance to brain protection.
I want to leave the listener with a thought to mull over. We established that caffeine is the driver, but the benefit plateaus at 3 cups because our enzymes get saturated. Could we ever see prescription caffeine? A targeted delivery system that bypasses the liver and goes straight to the adenosine receptors? Or is there something about the complexity of the beverage itself, the ritual, the heat, the smell, that we just can't replicate in a pill?
That is the billion-dollar question. Is the magic strictly in the molecule or is it in the cup?
Something to think about while you brew your next pot. That's all for this deep dive from What the Study Says. If you found this helpful, or if you just feel vindicated about your addiction, make sure you're subscribed.
And share this with your coffee-loving or tea-sipping friends. It's good news worth spreading.
Until next time, stay curious.
Take care.